Let's see if we can fix this. There we go. Give me a moment. A little rusty. Hmm. Howdy, y'all. Welcome to History by Phillips. I'm Mr. Phillips. Quick little update. Parents, next week, all the students will be coming back. Well, I finally have full classrooms. Next week, Tuesday, we're going to be quizzing and getting ready for a test, but I still have several students missing work in my Google Classroom. So, parents, help me out if you can. Go home, make sure your child logs on, goes to my Google Classroom. First thing you'll probably see is a screen like this. The important thing you want to look for is this classwork tab. Most of the time it's on the top, but depending on your device, these tabs may be located at the bottom of the screen. But if you click on the classwork tab, right now we're being going over medieval Europe. We're about to do the last lesson of this series, the late Middle Ages. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the important thing on here is some students are missing some work right here where it says class discussion number one, church and culture DBQ, class discussion number two. These three things right here. Well, if I can get them highlighted correctly. Anyways, these three things right here. Class discussion number one, church and culture DBQ, and class discussion number two. Make sure the students get those done. It'll be very beneficial for them, especially when we come back on Tuesday. I digress. But yeah, parents, if you can help me out, make sure your kids are logged on and have completed these three assignments. If they want to, do the quiz as well. Sorry about that. Here's the announcements. But anyway, just make sure you're doing your work before you come to school Tuesday. But I digress. Let's get into today's lesson. So today's lesson is going to be on the late Middle Ages. This is the fifth lesson in this lecture series. We went over five things. We've talked about the early Middle Ages, talking about how the Frankish Empire converted to Christianity, starting with King Clovis. The second lecture video was on the feudalism, how society structured itself. The third series, we talked about the Crusades. The fourth series, we talked about the church and culture of medieval society. And right now, we're going to cap off our Middle Age series with the late Middle Ages. Let me get my pointer ready. There'll be two big things we'll be talking about today. We'll be talking about the famine and the plague. You guys probably know it as the Black Death. And we'll also be talking about divisions in religion and politics. The Catholic Church kind of has some infighting, and England and France starts hating each other for a good while. Right here, here's some scenes from when the plague was striking Europe quite a bit. And over here we have Joan of Arc. She is a French military leader, very young for her age. She started her career at 17, inspired by God, or some say she's crazy. Who knows? Depends on your perspective. And that's why we have history class. But without further ado, let's dive into it. So first, let's talk about what's going on in Europe. So Europe in the early to mid 1300s, it was going through a climate change, whatever the folks call it these days. The weather was changing. It's getting really cold winters and really rainy summers. Now, that might not sound like a big deal. It's supposed to be really cold in the winter. You're supposed to get some rain in the summer. But with years of this going on and on and on, it turned the soil bad, almost like a swamp-like state. Here's a artist's rendition of what it was like back in the day, and obviously the ground wasn't that black, but you could tell with the years of this really cold winter and really rainy summers, the soil is taking a toll. All of a sudden, folks can't grow food. You can't grow food, you can't eat. This is what we call a famine. Students make note of that, the word famine. Real prominent between 1315 and 1322. The famine was struck Europe. So if you can't eat, you don't have energy. Now this is going to be real bad. The famine's bad enough, but we have an incoming plague, kind of like what we're going through today with COVID-19. But the plague on top of a famine, it's just guaranteed to be disastrous. Uh, think about it. Do you feel like doing anything when you're real hungry? Do you feel like running or working out or just doing anything in general? No, your body's weak. It needs nutrients to function right. But if your body doesn't get those nutrients, your body's just going to be in a weakened state. and you do not want to be in a weakened state when a plague comes through. But that's what happened in medieval Europe in 1300. So Black Death. It would start over here in China, eastern central China, uh, under the Golden Khanate of the Han Dynasty. Basically, as fleas on the rats. I've been saying this in class with students. It's the fleas on the rats on the boats in the ports go to Europe. That's how it's spread. Keep in mind, because of the Mongol rule in China, they was able to establish the silk trade roads, the trade routes. They're very well established now. So you have this disease starting in China, very similar to the COVID-19 suspected being in Wuhan, China. But the Black Death, the Black Plague, it would start here in China, make its way along these various trade routes. This whole network is known as the Silk Road. Remember that from our China series. Well, whoever taught you your China series, but remember that the Silk Road. That's what these trade routes are called. Anyways, this disease, this plague, it would make its way here. A notable place that usually a lot of folks demarcate is here in Kaffa on the Black Sea. Basically, just think of this as where the rats get on the boats. From here, uh, they would make their way into the Mediterranean and hit Italy. You can think of Italy kind of like being New York City here in the United States, meaning it's a big trade hub. It's a busy place. It's a central location. If you're going to go trade, you're going to go hit the Italian peninsula. And that's exactly what happens. A lot of these folks come here to Italy, hit these various ports, start trading goods, talking to folks. But as soon as it hits Italy, it spreads like wildfire. The Black Death will go out throughout Europe. Uh, Between Europe, Asia, and Africa, an estimated 75 million folks died. To put that in perspective, at the time, it's estimated that the world population was roughly 350 million, but you have 75 million dying worldwide. That's roughly 20%. Uh, Compared to today with COVID 19, I think the closest count right now there's around 2 million deaths worldwide, but our population is roughly 7.5 billion. That's less than 1% of a casualty rate. The Black Death was able to wipe out 20% of humanity. No man, no technology is capable of that. This is one of the closest times humans have came to extinction. Was with this death. We've learned a lot from that. We've implemented our lessons learned from Black Death with COVID-19 and with Spanish flu and all these things. Maybe that's why it's not as plagues are not as effective today. But I digress. There is one good thing that came out of this though. Peasants were able to start earning wages for their work. Think about it. You are a lord and lady. Remember the feudal system? Got kings and queens, lords and ladies, knights, peasants. The lords and ladies owned the land, tend the land. They would make the peasants work it. Well, you're a lord or lady, and you wake up one day, all of a sudden, all your peasants are dead. They're dying from the Black Death. Now, you being a fancy lord or lady, you're not going to go out there and farm that land. So you're going to go start looking for workers. You'll go to other peasants like, well, Mr. and Mrs. Peasant, would you like to come to my land and work? Now, the peasant's in a power or in a position of power. He's like, yeah, I will, but on one condition: if you start paying me. Well, the lords and ladies, they're not going to work that land, so they cave in and they start paying these peasants for their work instead of just letting them live on the land for free. They're actually paying them to work the land now. Uh, One of the first times that you start seeing wages on a mass scale in Europe because of this. Moving on, we're going to talk about divisions in religion and politics, mostly the politics. England and France would fight over land for a long time, and Christians would retake the Iberian Peninsula, i.e., Spain. So divisions in religion and politics. Real quick on the religion side, the Catholic Church went through a something called the Great Schism. This would be the second Great Schism. Remember, the first one was between Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, also known as Greek Orthodox. Well, this schism that happened between 1378 and 1417. Basically, you have three guys claiming to be Pope. It causes a lot of confusion in the Catholic Church. Nobody knows who's in charge. Just great confusion at the time. Known as the Great Schism. All you really need to know. Well, more to know, but we'll move on. Anyways, the 100 Years' War lasts a little over 100 years. Just 900 Years War, a really long time. But anyway, I've kind of been lying to my students and make them do all these geography quizzes and geography games. And they've been labeling this as France. Well, in medieval times, France more looked like this, with these purple regions, with Agincourt up here disputed between France and England. Well, King Philip, he's sitting in his French kingdom. He's like, you know what? I want to extend France all the way up to the shoreline. It just makes more sense. Well, how can England rule from across the water anyway? So I'm just going to annex this land and make it my own. So that's exactly what he does. So King Philip, he invades a area in southwest France known as Gascony. He comes here in Gascony and starts taking over. But in response, King Edward of England, in response to King Philip taking Gascony, King Philip starts invading from the north. A lot of battles start happening. Uh, Agincourt is a very famous one. Gascony, all those. Anyways, the English will be winning this war for a good while. But eventually, the French would overcome and beat the English in the later part of this war. But a notable from this war is this lady known as Joan of Arc. She convinced Prince Charles to let her command a French army. Uh, Herman has she's inspired by God. She is blessed by God to do this. She's very charismatic, very believable. Like she has leadership. People want to believe in her. Well, she's pretty good too. She'd meet the English on the field of battle several times. Great tactician, just like Saladin. When we talk about Saladin and how he took Jerusalem, uh, she's even wounded in battle a couple times and still came out. She ended up becoming a symbol for France, something to fight for. If she's willing to fight for France, I'm willing to fight for France. We have ladies in our army willing to die for this. Meanwhile, you have the rich English who's not willing to do anything, yada, yada, yada. This starts developing a lot of patriotism, a lot of nationalism for the French. A lot of French pride comes from this. But eventually she get captured. She'll get captured by the English. Now, the English, they would put her on trial, part of the Inquisition, for heresy, claiming that she's a witch. Long story short, sorry, ladies, I've been saying this for a while. Been kind of treated like second-class citizens for a good part. There are some exceptions, some African societies, Native American societies, and somewhere in some East Asian societies. But for the most part, women have been treated kind of harshly throughout history. Uh, they accused her of being a witch because how could a woman be leading men? How could she be this successful, leading armies? Blah blah blah. She must be in cahoots with the devil. She must have sold her soul. She must be working with dark magic, something, something, something. Because there's no way she'd be this successful on the battlefield. She has to be something otherworldly. That's evil. That was the mindset of the English, anyway. Obviously, she wasn't a witch, but according to the English, she was. So they would try her, convict her of heresy, and they would burn her at the stake. I believe she was 19, maybe 20, but I think 19 years old when she would die. But this would be a rallying call for France. This would motivate France to end up winning the Hundred Years' War. And after the Hundred Years' War, England would go into more infighting because they couldn't determine who was king, kind of like with the Great Schism. But kind of like the same scenario when we had Harold Godwinson and William Duke of Normandy fighting for the English kingship. Same thing will happen here. There's three folks that claim the English throne. This Civil War will be known as the War of Roses. What you need to know is King Henry, Henry Tudor, ends up winning that. Moving on to the last slide. This will be going into the Reconquista. Now, remember, in the first lecture series, we talked about the early Middle Ages. We talked about a guy named Charles the Hammer Martel. Now, Charles the Hammer Martel, he's a new Christian with the Frankish Empire, and he's wanting to Christianize Europe. Charlemagne would end up doing that. But in the meantime, Charlemagne, his efforts was to drive out the Muslims from Spain or the Iberian Peninsula, pretty much shoo them away back to North Africa. He's successful, but give it a couple centuries later, some of them Turks, those Muslims from North Africa, they would come back to Spain and start resettling. Uh, so, what the church, a lot of Christians would do is launch something called the Reconquista. Basically, it just means reconquest, doing what Charles the Hammer Martel did in the early Middle Ages. pretty much just re-Christianized Spain. But they'll do this through the Spanish Inquisition. Now, remember, the Inquisition was a court set up by the Catholic Church. But oftentimes, somebody would be what you call it, blamed for committing heresy. Remember, heresy is saying anything bad about the Catholic Church or God. Now, obviously, this court's not going to target their fellow Catholics, so they'll start targeting Muslims and Jews. Remember, a lot of folks are still blaming the Jews for the Black Death. They didn't realize bacteria and fleas and all that was a thing. I'm sure some did, but for the most part, they blame the Jews because there's some religious animosity there. Historically, Jews are blamed for killing Jesus. If you kill the Son of God, this must be God punishing us. Blah blah blah. They thought it was apocalyptic times because of what the Jews did. But I digress. Anyway, Spanish Inquisition. Uh, they would put folks on trial for heresy. If found guilty, he's going to be executed. Innocent, they'll often torture you. But long story short, if you went to the Inquisition, he's probably going to be tortured for a while and probably had a good chance of dying. That's what happened to a lot of folks that went to this court. Now, the Catholic Church, they're not going to target their fellow Catholics. They're going to target Muslims and Jews. Think of this kind of like scare tactics. You can almost relate this to what Hitler and the Nazis did in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, where they started implementing laws and just getting stricter and stricter and stricter. Uh, that's what they're doing here. They're just rounding up anybody that's not a Catholic on some bullcrap charges, throw them in the torture chamber, and kill them. Basically, it's just trying to, in an effort to keep Spain Catholic and keep the Muslims and Jews out. But I digress. That is it. We have finished our lecture series on medieval Europe. This is the 5th video in the series. Remember, next week, Tuesday, we will be going over our study guides and quizzing. Wednesday, we will have our test. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're ready if you trust in me. There's a method to my madness. And Thursday, we will be introduced to our next series. We'll be going over the Reformation, or the split in the Catholic Church between Catholics and Protestants. We'll be talking about Martin Luther. I'm sure you guys heard about him. We'll be knocking down some misconceptions and getting into the facts and analyzing some primary sources. Woo! I can't wait, baby. But I digress. But I've been Mr. Phillips. This has been History by Phillips. Thank y'all. Everybody take care. If I remember how to do this. Everybody take care. Peace. And I'll see y'all next week.